I've reached my limit. Can I stay with you for a few days?
My father, who had been driven out by my mother and sisters, came to my house. He's never said, "I can't," or "it's impossible" before. I blamed myself for pushing him to this point. "Dad, I'm sorry." Knowing the pain Father was going through, I tried to apologize for not being able to do anything. And then,
"Would you like to live with us, father-in-law?"
Max proposed this to my father. "Are you sure about this?" Surprised, I looked at Max. My father, too, was wide-eyed in surprise. "I am 26 years old. My name is Sarah. I married Max, whom I had been dating since college 2 years ago. I had been enjoying my life both privately and professionally. Max is my ally and an understanding and good husband. I never imagined that I would meet such a person and get married. In my family there was my mother, 2 older sisters, and me, the youngest. I was raised in an environment where it was absolutely not allowed to defy the 3 of them. Being the youngest, I was at the bottom of the priority list, and of course my mother didn't pay much attention to me. Whenever I voiced my opinions, I would receive sharp words back from my mother and my sisters. Having grown up in such an environment, I learned to suppress my true feelings and slowly stopped expressing my own opinions. Even when treated like a servant, I obeyed my mother and my sisters without resistance. Why on earth was a girl born? Wanted a boy? Honestly, I hate it. I don't need you, but since there's no choice, you can live here. You won't be kept in the house if you don't work. With these words, my mother often oppressed me. I couldn't do anything, even I was told such things. How many times I wanted to answer back. Preparing meals, doing laundry, setting up the bath. By the time I entered elementary and middle school, all these became my responsibilities. At first, I was pleased when people around me praised me, saying, "Wow, and good job. That's the bare minimum." My mother would say this, and there were never any words of thanks or praise. On the contrary, she and my sisters would complain together about the seasoning of the food or the way I folded the laundry. But the one who supported me through all of this was my father. Unlike my mother and my sisters, my father loved me and cared for me deeply. My father was also marginalized in our family, disliked by my mother and my sisters, and treated just like me. Even so, my father was always there to protect me.
"I'm sorry, Sarah. It's not fair that you have to bear all these hardships. We should all be living together in harmony."
That's what he used to tell me, holding me close. My father worked from early in the morning until late at night, but on his days off, he would spend time with me and meet the demands of my mother and my sisters. He always listened to my feelings, almost without fail, and accepted my words. But it seemed that my mother and my sisters didn't like that. "Today there's no one to shield you," she would say this, then assign me tasks. My mother would say terrible things to my father, such as, "Despite being a man," or "You don't earn enough money." Emily and Laura would also say things like, "You're disgusting," or "Don't talk to me," and laugh together. Because of these constant criticisms, even though my father was on my side, my feelings were only growing weaker. Seeing my struggle, my father talked to me when I entered high school.
"You should study hard and aim for university. You can move out of this house and live on your own. There's still a lot of possibilities for you, Sarah. You don't have to stay in this house, enduring all the time. I want you to live your own life."
I was happy to hear my father's words, but I also felt worried. This was because Emily, my sister who's 6 years older, was attending a private university, and Laura, my other sister who's 4 years older, was attending a professional university. "Your earnings are too low." That's what my mother used to say to my father frequently. And then,
It's his fault that we're poor. He only earns a small salary. When you graduate high school, you need to start working.
That's what she would often tell me. Knowing such interactions, I believed that we didn't have much money in our family. I thought my father was stretching himself thin when he said,
"You should aim for college. It's okay to live on your own."
But my father would tell me not to worry about money.
"It's my responsibility that you're enduring hardship. That's why I want you to live freely."
Thank you, Dad.
Don't worry. So find the university you want to attend and study what you love. I want you to find what you want to do and lead a happy life after experiencing hardship. This is my wish.
His hand, clutching mine with tears in his eyes, exuded strong determination. After hearing my father's feelings, I started to concentrate on my studies. I responded to the demands of my mother and my sisters and spent all other time studying. And then, after all the hard work, I successfully passed the university entrance exams. I was elated, and my father and I celebrated together, hugging each other. I kept it a secret until the last moment that I would be living on my own to attend college, and I only told my mother and my sisters on the day of my move. Emily had already become a working adult and was living alone. Therefore, only my mother and Laura were at home. But when I announced my news, they showered me with harsh words. The verbal abuse went on and on, but finally, I was freed from my mother and Laura. I had my first experience of buying a cell phone, along with finding a university and a place to live alone, but I kept it all a secret from my mother and Laura. I only kept in touch with my father, and started living days without interacting with my mother and Laura. But university life isn't so easy, even when you're away from such family. I was shy and had difficulty expressing my own opinions, so even within the same department I had little presence and had no friends. Then, Max approached me.
"What do you think, Sarah?"
I was surprised to be addressed by Max, a central figure among everyone. I was in a hurry because I was bad at speaking in front of people and couldn't say anything when he suddenly brought up a conversation. Max looked at me like that.
"Try to say what you're thinking. It won't get across if you don't say it,"
he urged me. I thought, what a pushy person, not considering the feelings of others. That was my first impression of Max. However, gradually I started noticing the kindness that Max possesses, the gentleness of listening to others' opinions and valuing them. Thanks to Max, I started making friends, little by little. Slowly, I started getting interested in Max, and somehow, we started dating in our 3rd year of university. When I told my father that I had a boyfriend named Max, my father excitedly said,
"Isn't that great? Congratulations!"
He was delighted. At the time of getting a job, when Max and I decided to live together, when we got married, my father, John, was always happy as if it were his own happiness. But I was always worried about my father. I haven't been back home since I left for university, and I haven't seen my father since then. Although we're in contact, I'm very concerned. My father and my mother and Laura are living together in that place. Even now, I'm sure my father is being nagged and commanded by my mother and Laura. Back then, it was all thanks to Dad that I got by, but now I'm an adult and working, and I have a supportive husband. My happiness now is thanks to Dad. So, if you're in trouble, Dad, I want you to feel free to ask me for help because I'll do anything. That's what I told my father when I announced my marriage. In the past, I couldn't express my feelings, but through spending time with Max, I've learned the importance of expressing my feelings to others, and I've been able to convey my honest feelings to my father.
"Thank you,"
my father said happily. Then 2 years passed. Until now, he hasn't asked me for help. Moreover, I heard that Emily recently quit her job, stopped living alone, and returned to our parents' house. My worry about my father has grown even more. On a certain day, it was right when I was telling Max that I couldn't stop worrying about my father, the intercom at our house rang. It was late December, and even though it was before 4 p.m., it was already getting dark outside. Thinking that we weren't expecting any deliveries, we looked through the intercom and were surprised. There stood my father. We quickly opened the front door. I hadn't seen my father in 8 years, and his cheeks were hollow, and he had a lot of white hair. He was standing there looking unwell. I figured something must have happened, considering he suddenly visited our home without any contact. Anyway, come inside. What happened? You're dressed so coldly. All my father had on was a long-sleeved shirt and pants. That's way too cold for December. Why would he be outside dressed so lightly? Then the reason came from my father's mouth. My father was kicked out by the woman.
I was ordered by them to go buy dessert. So I went to a nearby store, and when I returned home, the door was locked. I pleaded to be let in, but they told me, "You can't come home anymore."
What?
I waited outside the house for several hours, but it didn't look like they were going to let me in. I left the house just as I was, without a mobile phone or jacket.
He told me what happened today as he rubbed his chilled body. I made warm tea for him. My father held the teacup in both hands as if to feel its warmth, and he muttered in a voice barely audible,
I might not be able to go back to that house.
What happened?
The woman's behavior has gotten worse since Emily came back. I've been tolerating it, but after this treatment, I have no energy to return. I like to think a bit about what to do from now on. Could I stay here for a few days? I'll leave as soon as I find a monthly apartment.
I had been worried about my father, but I didn't realize it was this bad. My father, who had never shown weakness before, had been pushed to this point. I'm sorry, Dad. I tried to apologize for not being able to do anything despite knowing my father's struggles. Then,
Why don't you live with us, father-in-law?
My husband spoke to my father. Are you sure? Surprised, I looked at my husband. My father, too, was looking surprised with wide eyes.
I don't think father-in-law is in good health. This is the first time we're meeting, but he looks really tired. I think it would be better for him to recover his strength while living with us before considering what to do next. I won't force you, but what do you think? Is it all right with you?
Both I and my father were grateful for Max's proposal. And so the three of us began living together. A few days after we started living with my father, the intercom rang. We looked through the intercom and all of us were surprised and looked at each other. My mother and my sisters were on the intercom screen. Why are they here? Stunned, and flashbacks from the past made me feel like I was suffocating. I didn't know what they would do if I didn't open the front door. In a hurry, I opened the front door. Oh, you really do live in such a nice place. I thought you were living a poor life in some dirty apartment. The sound of my mother's voice, which I hadn't heard in a long time, brought back past memories, and at the same time, the hatred inside me returned. How did you find out about this place? I looked at your father's phone and found your address registered there. So you do have a phone, Sarah? Why would you give him your contact information but not tell us? Are you confused about who you should be considerate of? Emily started speaking after my mother, looking down on me as always. My mother, who looked satisfied with the situation, continued speaking with a smirk. I don't really care, but is your father here? We're in trouble since he's gone. Even though she said she was in trouble, she didn't seem to care at all. The three of them were smirking and waiting for my answer. You're the ones who kicked him out. Why are you saying you're in trouble? You've become quite cheeky, haven't you? We know he's here. Move! I won't move, I responded loudly to my mother. I couldn't stand the same commanding tone and condescending attitude from my mother as before. Before, I could never have raised my voice like this. I had changed, supported by Max. However, my mother couldn't hide her irritation and spoke in a disgruntled tone.
Who do you think you're talking to? Are you allowed to oppose me? Move, now! Can't you listen to what I'm saying?
I'm not the same person I was back then. I don't have to listen to what you say anymore. I had decided not to falter. Max stood beside me, preventing my mother and the others from entering. A while later, the argument of "let us in" and "please go home" continued. It seemed like my mother, possibly tired of the hassle, had given up.
I understand. It's a waste to interact with you guys any further. I don't even want to hear your voices. If you say you won't let us in, then tell him. There's no money in the bank account, so tell him to make a deposit. All he can do is bring money home, and he can't even do that.
I was dumbfounded by my mother's words. How did my mother think she'd been able to live up to now, without working a day in her life? I lost my patience. Mom, Dad is going to live with us. He won't be under your control anymore. Divorce him already. Don't cause him any more pain. Unexpected words returned from my mother against my resolved declaration.
Stop making it sound like I'm the villain. I've endured being with a low-income, useless man for the sake of family. If anything, you should be thanking me.
What are you talking about?
You're just like your father. Low-income losers. You talk so high and mighty, but in the end, you're just licking each other's wounds.
My mother's words made me feel like I was losing sight of myself. I felt like shouting out loud. At that moment, it was Max who spoke.
Sarah works hard. She holds the position of a supervisor and earns a decent salary. I would like you to retract your belittling comments about licking each other's wounds.
When Max confronted my mother and the others, my mother retorted as if ready for battle.
Don't butt in, you're an outsider. Outsiders should stay quiet.
The moment my mother lashed out at Max, my father, who was supposed to be in the living room, stood by my side and said in a stern voice to my mother,
Let's divorce. I can't cause any more trouble for Max and Sarah.
Dad. My sisters, who had heard their father's words, whispered among themselves, saying, Good, good, and we don't need a useless man like you in this house. As if being pushed by her daughters, my mother said,
Let's divorce, fine.
Just as I thought things had settled unexpectedly fast, an unforeseen proposal came.
However, I have one condition. Give me the house. If you do, we can finalize the divorce.
My mother made an unreasonable proposal. How selfish and greedy could she be? However, my father immediately accepted her proposal. Is it okay, Dad? I was surprised, but my father replied to me with a smile.
If it leads to a divorce, I'll gladly give it up.
His face turned serious again as he addressed my mother and the others.
I'll do as you wish, so please go home for today. I'll come to you tomorrow.
With those words, my father sent my mother and the others home. As they were leaving, they sneered at me, but it didn't matter anymore. I felt guilty for making the unnecessary proposal that led to my father losing his family home. However, my father said,
Thank you. You spoke up well. It's not your fault, Sarah.
He patted my shoulder as he said this. The next day, my father returned to his family home with the divorce papers. He was there to gather his belongings and have my mother sign the divorce papers to proceed with the formalities. My father seemed relieved when he returned from his family home. While there may be some regret over losing his family home, if it alleviates some of my father's burden, I thought it was worth it. A few months have passed since then. My father updated me on what was happening with my mother and the others. It seems that after they took the family home from my father, they planned to indulge in the money they got from selling it. However, the house was old and in a poor location. Both the house and the land didn't sell for much, and there were also demolition costs, so little money remained. They lost their house and had no savings. Emily and Laura didn't have stable jobs, and my mother was unemployed. They used to belittle my father, saying his earnings were low. Now they didn't have the living expenses my father used to provide, and he was no longer there. It didn't take long for the three of them to fall into financial difficulty. They came to our house several times seeking help, but we didn't open the door. Each time they didn't give up and made a fuss at the entrance. Through the intercom I said, "If you continue to cause us trouble, we will call the police." I told this and sent my mother and her daughters away. Now they are somehow getting by day, renting a small apartment for the three of them. Even my mother, who had never worked before, seemingly has to work due to their desperate living conditions. They were living on the edge. The disrespectful words once directed at me and my father are now thrown at each other among the three of them. In other words, it seems they are in a blame game, trying to figure out whose fault it was that they ended up like this. People don't change easily. Up until now, my father and I had been their targets, but now someone else has taken the place, and they will likely continue to live a life that is financially and emotionally poor and lonely. On the other hand, my family and I are leading a completely different life. As it turns out, despite being belittled for his low income, my father had been building up assets worth several $100 million through stock trading for a few years. My father informed me about this after his divorce was finalized. My father had decided not to mention it until after the divorce, thinking that if my mother found out, she would try to take those assets, and he needed to prevent that at all costs. That's why my father was willing to give up the family home. Now my family and I live comfortably in a new house that my father had built with part of his assets. My father seems to be planning to quit his job to focus on trading stocks. Because Max and I both have jobs, we are not struggling financially. Now we support each other, building up assets. From now on, my father, Max, and I intend to create a happy family, which was not possible in the past. Looking forward to the future.